At least the three major challengers to Mayor Fry all support a labor standards board, so I have that to look forward to.
Well, so does Mayor Fry. Mayor Fry supports the labor standards board.
Okay, fair point.
He will not be outflanked.
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
My new hobby is debating transportation issues with candidates endorsed by all of Minneapolis. That's what I've been having fun doing.
I love this for you. I love that you find some joy in that.
I was surprised that they were willing to come on. I got Josh Basset in Ward 8. I got Lydia Millard in Ward 10. Although you have to come on Wedge Live if you're in Ward 10.
If you're a Ward 10 resident, it's literally named after our ward. Like, why would you not go on the Wedge Live podcast? Even David Wheeler did it.
Yeah, that's right, David. Classic episode. Did you ever watch the David Wheeler episode?
Of course I did. I watched every episode that you've ever recorded with any Ward 10 candidates.
Okay. Just Ward 10 candidates. I'm glad you were
the others, it's like I get to it if someone tells me that it's like worth the watch, but then I watch it at or I listen to it on like time and a half speed.
Okay. All right. Are you using your time wisely? Fair. As a council member, I would be worried if you listened to it.
I do it in the morning when I'm getting ready for work. So I'm like doing my eyeliner and then I'll like listen and then I'll like have to stop because otherwise I'm going to mess up what I'm doing.
This is the Wedge Live podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Council Vice President, Minneapolis Council Vice President Aisha Chughtai is here.
And more importantly, Ward 10 resident.
Ward 10 resident, yes. Whittier resident.
Whittier resident. A Whittier renter.
You want to do a lightning round? I've been doing lightning rounds. I did one with Elliot Payne just to get our blood flowing, and I feel like it was very effective there.
The anxiety of being recorded is not enough for me, so let's do a lightning round.
Yeah. So here we go. You ready?
I'm ready.
What is your signature issue?
Tenants issues?
Name 5 important and distinct Ward 10 constituencies.
Renters, urbanists, artists, longtime homeowners, anybody who works in the like service industry, baristas, bartenders, servers, etc. Queer people. Oh wait, that's 6.
That is 6. You know who you left out?
Who did I leave out?
The business community.
Do they live in the ward?
I don't know. You left them out. I'm just saying it's going to be noticed.
I think they're an important stakeholder in the ward, absolutely. But I don't think I left them out because I did talk about people who work in the service industry, and that's who actually makes these businesses run.
Okay. Hottest button. Which is the hottest button? I'm going to give you 2 choices. Ooh. Crime or transportation issues like parking, bikes, buses.
I would say today it is, I feel like it's really going back to being transportation issues because parking comes up way more than it used to. And that's like 60% of the thing that we hear about, even during the time when crime was like the hot button issue.
I'm going to interrupt my lightning round. Are you surprised by how much transportation comes up? Is that what you expected coming into the job?
I don't think it's what I expected coming into the job, but I'm not surprised by it at all. It's like, it's a hallmark of land use, right? And land use is the city's thing.
Imagine yourself at the Uptown Theater in your mind. You're holding a microphone. What is the key to taming an unruly crowd? What do you do?
Don't try. It's not going to happen.
It's not going to. I thought you did all right last
week. Thank you.
You didn't let it get out of control.
Say what you want to say, and, nobody's going to like what you have to say anyway.
So you're not willing to give us advice on that one? You're not going to tell us what the key is?
I would say breathing, trying to control your anxiety and not getting off track on what you want to say. Those are like, I guess, more helpful things. But really nothing you say is going to help the situation. People are rightfully upset about feeling left behind. Like that's something I think we can all feel like we have something in common with, but
Name at least 3 Minneapolis police sources that council member Latricia Vitaw named in her famous Say Their Name speech.
I think this is a great time for you to do like a voiceover and actually like say their names. I'm the wrong person to come to though.
Can't think of one.
I can't think of one.
I'm
And
trying to
I was going to attempt and then I just was like, I know I'm going to get it wrong. So
I can think of one. I didn't prep this, but Cabo. That's one.
Oh, I was going to say something like, yeah, see? You see this? You see this? Yeah,
It's difficult.
it's really difficult.
I'm going to repeat that one more time. Haven, Maximilian, Buster, Blue, Trooper, Teak, Goliath, Rooster, and Cabo are the name of some of our horses. I don't know if that's all of them, but that is their name.
Favorite part of your job?
What a privilege to be able to make a difference in people's lives every day.
Least favorite?
Getting yelled at all the time.
Moment that will stay with you?
The Ward 10 convention last time around.
Yeah, that'll stay with me. Here we are. We're coming up on the 2nd anniversary.
Yeah, that's right. And we're going to be in the same location.
I'm surprised they're letting us back.
I'm surprised they're letting us back too, but I think they charged us more money this time. You know, the Minneapolis Public Schools, $100 million deficit will make you do a lot of things.
What do we talk about too much?
How the council is responsible for things that are not actually our job.
What do we not talk about enough?
How the mayor doesn't do his.
You're giving the Elliot Payne answers. Did you watch the Elliot Payne episode?
I did not watch the Elliot Payne episode. That was prep I was supposed to do for this episode, and I didn't do it.
I feel like those are the exact answers he gave.
You're kidding. We're on this, there's a reason we're a leadership team.
After 4 years, how are you different than when you were first elected?
I'm a lot better at this job.
Who is the funniest council member?
I believe I am.
Oh, really?
Oh, 100%.
Okay. Who is the meanest council member?
Latricia Vitaw.
Okay, I agree. That's the
I
only...
think she stands by that too.
Probably. She heckled me on the street once. I tell this story all the time. I couldn't believe it.
If you do it to a stranger walking down the street, can you imagine what you do to the people that you actually know?
Oh, we weren't strangers.
Oh.
But she didn't appreciate a video that I posted where she essentially said my job is getting dressed up and putting on my lipstick and selling what you tell me, which is an embarrassing thing to say. But if you're an elected official, or a candidate, people are going to post stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that's the job we sign up for.
I'm not a mean man. She called me a mean man. She yelled it at me from across the street.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. I enjoyed it.
Don't bully my constituents. That's what I have to say about that.
That's a moment that will stay with me. So let's get into longer. You can give longer answers now. We're going to the regular portion of the episode.
We're done with the lightning round. Do you think I survived? I think I survived.
Those are good. I feel like people will be entertained. You actually answered. I didn't think you would answer the meanest council member question.
It's hard when there is not an answer. In this case, there is one.
So the meeting in Uptown last Monday, it was supposed to be about crime. There was a lot of transportation stuff inserted into it, I noticed. But you talked about a dynamic where you would bring your Uptown area concerns to the mayor's administration. Like, essentially, they would blow you off. Nothing would be done about it. There's a lot of misunderstanding about what the council and the council member has the power to do and what the mayor is responsible for. So can you talk about that some more? Describe what kinds of concerns you were bringing and what was not getting addressed?
Yeah, so an example would be, just bringing up concerns around businesses in Uptown that are closing. Especially in talking to other members of the council, that represent commercial corridors in our city, and just hearing them talk about like the challenges with the retention of businesses and the struggles with keeping commercial storefronts occupied. I was starting to realize like there's something unique that's happening in Uptown, and you go to the appropriate agencies and you start talking about like these are the concerns that I think there's a problem in Uptown. I think that there is a problem with being able to keep commercial storefronts filled, and I think this requires some attention. And then you kind of hear this pushback of like, oh, well, that's not real. That doesn't really matter. Or, bringing that to the conversations around Hennepin Avenue and the Hennepin Avenue redesign, which, as you might remember, was, like the first 6 months, 7 months of my first term. And I really kept hearing the opposition to honoring the will of the vast majority of residents and people who participated in the community engagement that was extensive and years long on the Hennepin Avenue redesign. And so one of the biggest pieces of pushback you heard to that was, well, businesses don't like it, and businesses have been struggling so much. And I remember talking about, I agree, businesses here are struggling. And so instead of offering platitudes, why don't we try to help? And here are all of these different things we can do to help businesses survive reconstruction. And there was like, we don't talk about that right now. Like that's not an issue. We're talking about a right-of-way issue. We're talking about an infrastructure project. What does the survival of businesses have to do with this right-of-way issue? And so, just this duality of like, I don't like this project, or I don't think that we should plan to execute it in the way that will actually help people who live here because of an economic development concern. But hey, all the things that we can actually do to stimulate economic development, we're not interested in that,
How do you diagnose what ails Uptown? Because people will pick their pet issue and they will blame it entirely. Well, there's not enough parking. I hear that a ton, and I happen to disagree with it. Some people will say, oh, it's crime. People are afraid to come to Uptown. Like, how do you diagnose what is happening?
I think that there's a reality of Uptown where it's always going to go through ups and downs. I think Uptown has always been and always will be the comeback queen. And she's in the middle of a comeback right now. And I would say that in its most recent iteration, Uptown is a commercial hub of our city that was built around people who don't actually live here. And it's not that there is some sort of lack of residents who are here, or lack of density or anything like that. This is one of the most dense communities in our city, and yet it wasn't built for people who live here. It was built for people who live in the suburbs and choose to visit Minneapolis. And I think that when we build a major economic hub around people who don't actually go here, then it is at the whims of whether they feel like coming here or not. And there's an abundance of residents who call Uptown home, and perhaps one of the ways that we can set up Uptown for success for the long haul is by making it easy for people who live in Minneapolis, who work in Minneapolis, who call Uptown home, to actually like meet their needs in this community, to patronize the businesses that are here, etc.
So let's help people understand how City Hall works. What is a thing that doesn't get reported that people should know that would help them understand? Like you said that we talk about things that the council should be doing that they don't really have power for is a thing we talk about too much. I spend a lot of time like, how do I help people understand how City Hall actually works? What could we tell people?
Mm-hmm. I think, well, a few thoughts here. One, I can't tell you how much power exists in contacting your council member, contacting your mayor's office, reporting issues to 311. The city of Minneapolis is a complaint-based enterprise, which means if you're having a problem and you report it, the likelihood that it actually gets addressed is pretty high. And I don't think that people do it enough, especially people who need government to work for them the most. And so if you're, you're a resident and you're like driving by, you see a pothole or you see the start of a sinkhole, right? You should report that. It's probably going to get fixed if you report it. If you don't, it isn't. And I think there's just a tremendous amount of like beauty and power in that is underutilized and under leveraged. I like you, I find it to be often very frustrating. I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall, being like, I agree that this thing that you're describing is a problem. Unfortunately, I don't have the authority to fix it. I find it to be really flattering that you believe I'm the mayor and I do have the authority to fix it. I just don't. And I'm really sorry about that. And that's not me finger pointing and playing a blame game. I'm trying to help you be successful in your advocacy. And I think, a part of the problem here is that our new government structure is in fact new. It was approved by voters in 2021, implemented in December of 2021, implemented being a loose term here. I think there's so much education that needs to be done in our city for folks to really understand like the immense amount of power that they voted for an executive, for a mayor to have. And there's so much work that we have to do in helping kind of demystify that. So like the council's authority is threefold. So it's like representation, and that's a pretty loose term. It just means in everything you do, you should be thinking about the 33,000 people you represent. It is policy making. So ordinances, resolutions, things like that. So you say, I believe that X thing should happen. Doesn't mean the thing is going to happen. It has to be implemented. Now, that's where we get into the mayor's job. So the council approves policies. The mayor actually implements them. And then it is in oversight. And the strongest tool of oversight exists through the budget. In all three of these things, I would say the strongest tool for actually making that happen is approving an annual budget and like watching over that budget like a watchdog. So that's the role of the council. Everything else lives with the mayor.
So it's an election year, and inevitably the chants of fund the police have become a key part of the campaign for certain council challengers. Mm-hmm. And what is irritating about that, probably for you too, but for me, the implication that police haven't been funded. Uh-huh. Right? The budget is up $50 million since 2022. Uh-huh. The council approved historic raises last year. So Minneapolis police officers are, I think, the best paid officers in the state of Minnesota. I think.
They are the highest paid officers of any major metropolitan area in the country, of any major city in the country. So a Minneapolis police officer makes more money than a New York City police officer, than a Chicago police officer, than a LA police officer. You don't need me to tell you about the difference in the cost of living in those large cities, but for context.
So I get irritated by that. And then I'm thinking, like, what? I'm trying to come up with hard questions for you. What could I ask you that isn't, why aren't the police well funded? Because they are.
Because they are. Fully funded, in fact.
You were among the 4 who voted against the police contract last year that made them the highest funded big city police officers in the country. So explain to us why you made that vote.
I remember that we were talking a lot about how we'd made immense amount of gains in this contract, to hold police officers accountable. And that was a very mind boggling time, because you remember in 2020 when, and in 2021, Chief Rondo and Mayor Fry spent a lot of time, a lot of political capital talking about how all of the barriers to constitutional policing, to lawful policing in our city were attributed to this ever powerful boogeyman that was at that time the police federation, the police union, and all of these the thing that stood in the way of reform was the police union's contract. And then I remember, fast forward a couple of years, that suddenly, like, the police contract had absolutely nothing to do with challenges to reform, had absolutely nothing to, there were no barriers presented by this contract. To me, in this most recent contract, a problem that I saw with it was a bunch of these wins that we were naming, whether it is, eliminating an excellent example of this, I would say, is like eliminating the 70-30 rule, which is for every 10 officers you hire, 7 of them have to be on patrol. And so, like, if the place where the police department is struggling is with being able to complete investigations, well, if you need to hire 10 new investigators who are sworn personnel, then you actually need to hire 30 new officers. And so that elimination, I'd say, is a big deal, but it's done through what's called a letter of agreement, which means it's not permanent language in the Federation's contract. And so I thought that a lot of the wins that we were talking about here were things that came out of a number of council members not voting for the Federation contract during my first year on the council. I thought that was a good thing in helping our labor relations department and our police our city administration take really seriously the need to prioritize the negotiations with the Federation, and that the wins that we were talking about were not permanent. And so whether they were good or enough is up for, is like a story that will only be, or a question we'll only be able to answer with time, but they're all temporary. And I think would have been in a more difficult place had all of them been permanent. And then I would say secondarily, it's that to date, I don't know of what this administration has done to actually implement the consent decree with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. And that's something that's, we approved an independent monitor a year ago. It was something that the consent decree itself was approved during my first term. To date, we don't know any progress to go anywhere. And so if we're going to reward a settlement we had to enter into because we had a 10-year documented history of violating our residents' human rights, and we're going to reward that with historic raises, double-digit raises to pay our police officers more than a New York City cop makes, than a Chicago cop makes, than an LA cop makes, then I don't get what it's all for. People call 911, police officers don't show up. Police officers show up, they don't complete investigations. Like, what are we actually getting for a 22% raise to your salary?
One of the things about police union contract negotiations is that by the time it comes up for a vote, you're no longer negotiating. Like, you're voting up or down on it. It's very high stakes. The politics are super hot. All the negotiation happened many weeks or months prior, and so it could be really difficult to vote against a contract. But also, if the mayor can't say, and his negotiators can't say, I can't give you this because I can't get it passed. If it's always been a 13-0 vote historically, and it's always been super easy for council members to roll over and just vote for it, I don't know.
There's no power, there's no stick.
Right. So is there a way to fix how those are negotiated? Or it's just, that's the mayor's job to negotiate this? What's the council's role other than to, at the very end, be in that position where it's very difficult to vote against?
Yeah. I mean, I think open negotiations are a tactic that our important for a lot of public sector unions, both from the perspective of management, which is the city in this perspective, and from the perspective of workers. But I think it gives residents in our city sort of this like front row seat. Of course, there are challenges to open negotiation as well, which is, either party at any time can request to close negotiations from the public. I think the city should be just a lot more proactive and a lot more have a lot more foresight in like what it is that we're actually trying to get out of these negotiations. I think it's an important piece of this puzzle is also like bringing residents along in the process. 'Cause, like if you can't always rely on the crazy council to be your boogeyman, like wait till you meet an average Minneapolis resident and hear what they think about like their experiences with the Minneapolis Police Department. Like they make all of us look extremely sane, like I just think there's many types of tools that can aid labor negotiations, and I don't know that all of them have been fully utilized. And I don't think it just rests with, unnamed bureaucrats in this process. I actually do think there's a role that everyone plays.
So one of the things that happened with the budget, and the argument I'm hearing from people like you and Councilmember Cashman in Ward 7 is, and others, they're like, we're not getting action from the mayor's administration. And so we're putting these things in the budget. We're funding projects to get action in all the places we're not seeing it. And on the safety ambassadors issue in particular, it came up at that meeting last week, where Amanda Harrington and Todd Barnett from the Office of Community Safety saying there's not enough money to fund the equivalent of what the Downtown Improvement District does, and to do that in 10 or so other corridors. So there hasn't been enough money allocated. They have to start small, start slow. And whereas you and Councilmember Cashman are like, this has been funded, why hasn't it been implemented? How are we to know who is correct there?
If you're going to start a brand new thing with public money, and we're talking like 7 figures worth of public money, you probably want some proof of concept. What I think Todd and the administration is correct about is, like the downtown ambassadors are it's a public-private partnership, and they exist in sort of this different way in a different geography. They've existed for a long time. So in order for us to replicate that model in 10 other parts of the city, would require us to like figure out exactly how much it's going to cost in Uptown or on Lake Street or on 38th Street. I agree. I don't know the answer to that question. Nobody does. I have some idea about what it might cost based on what it does in downtown. Well, that's why I funded a pilot. So you can come back to me and tell me, actually, it's going to cost this much money, or these are some interesting, roadblocks that we're running into. Not really sure how to deal with this one, but feel really clear about how to deal with this other one. And then we can continue to like fund this on an ongoing basis. The goal was always for us to fund the expansion of cultural ambassadors citywide. I feel really clear on that, but it's the irony to me is not 1 year ago, right? July last year, Todd Barnett, Commissioner of Community Safety, highest paid city employee in the city's history, makes like maybe twice as much money as the governor. Came to us last year and said, actually, the reason we need to defund every single one of these pilots is because we don't have the, what did they say, capacity to start working on them. 8 months later, they're coming to us and they're saying, actually, we've always had the capacity. The problem is you haven't funded these on an ongoing basis. Like, cool. You want me to fund this on an ongoing basis? You want this council to do that this year? Happy to. Can you implement one, or are we like funding fake shit that doesn't exist?
Yeah. What is the public safety question we should be asking? It's not funding. What is the question? It's not funding in terms of police, I should say.
Yeah, I would say about half of the calls that go to the Minneapolis Police Department today are able to be responded to by someone who's not a peace officer or a licensed law enforcement agent in our city. So what are we doing to pilot and create the next behavioral crisis response programs of our city? If half the calls that are going to our police department could be answered by someone else, like, what are we doing to increase capacity of our law enforcement ecosystem, our public safety ecosystem, to actually increase safety in our city?
Here's a concern that I heard. I think it was from the Lake and Irving owner at that meeting.
Cicada, yeah.
Deep skepticism, basically saying, do violence interrupters don't work. And so I'm wondering, do violence interrupters work? How do we measure that?
I think violence interruption and the concept of violence interrupters is it's like a public health concept framework. It's something that does work when it's invested in correctly, when there are appropriate controls in place, when you're actually measuring data. I think what Chris is correct about, what a lot of people are correct about, including, you take Chris Ikeda on one end of the spectrum, or someone like even like the Uptown Business Association on one end of a political spectrum, and you put Communities United Against Police Brutality on another end of that same, ideological spectrum. And if both of them can agree that, I want safety services, but tell me what controls do you have in place to make these violence interrupters actually do what they say they're doing? And how are you measuring this data? And the city's response to that, and I believe they're correct about it, both of them is we haven't been measuring this data. And I voted against the contract in question my first year on the city council. And I remember it was a very contentious thing, but I will say I think that the organization in question here has done a lot of harm, has done the opposite of interrupting violence in our own community. And I think there are multiple businesses in Uptown that have had experiences of spending the little resources they have on contracting with these same organizations on a private basis, and finding that there were no services delivered that they thought would happen. It's like the equivalent of like a buyback program, like you pay all this money for a thing, you think you're going to get a service, you get nothing. I think that it's actually a real shame, because violence prevention, violence interruption, group violence intervention, all of these programs, they do work if you actually create them, invest in them, and scale them correctly. I'm not the person with the most amount of subject matter expertise on such an issue. There are people around the country that are, though. There are people in our own city that are, and I think it comes down to the fact that this administration over and over again chooses to contract with their friends and not the people that have the subject matter expertise to do a thing.
I asked a lot about public safety in my conversation with Lydia Millard, and one of the complaints was you haven't built relationships with, I guess, the city's public safety leaders. That was the implication there. Failure to build relationships, because there's a lot of talk of relationships. You were also blamed for the state of Uptown and business closures. These other two, the state of Uptown and then not responding to emails, is something I've heard about council members in every ward across the city. I heard about Lisa Bender her entire time in office. Hard for anyone to judge whether it's true or not, but take the relationships criticism. Prove to us you've got great relationships and you're knocking it out of the park in terms of your relationships with public safety leaders.
Mm-hmm. If I had an inability to build relationships, I wouldn't have gotten elected to the city council at age 23. First of all. Secondly, I wouldn't have been elected the vice president of the city council. Like, these are all things that require a deep understanding of people and a deep commitment to relationships. I'm the chair of the budget committee. It's my job to say no to members who I have deep respect for, who are my equals. When they come to me with an idea that's like a little bit out there or a little half baked, and be like, here are the 10 things I need you to figure out before this is ready to be voted on. And that's something that requires deep trust, deep relationship. I'm really proud of that. And I think about the amount of investment that I put into my job and the amount that I invest into building relationships with people, whether it's a member of the council, a department head, someone who delivers a frontline service, someone who used to work at the city, someone who's on their way out, and whatever it may be, someone who just doesn't trust any politician. Fair, correct take, I'd say. But to work with them to advance a shared policy goal, to make something that's an idea a reality. I do all of that on behalf of the 33,000 people that I represent. I really care about improving the lives of my constituents, and that's the most serious business to me. I'd say, like, there's lots and lots of criticisms of my relationship with different public safety leaders. I'd say, like, my office meets with we're now on our third police inspector, once every other week. Like, the chief and I go to the same gym, like.
Really? What gym is that? Well, maybe you don't want to dox yourself. I don't want to send people
I'm not
to
going
the
to
gym.
tell you that right now, but I'll text you later.
Do you watch him work out? Do you watch his pecs bounce when he works out?
No, because I don't have a lot of time while I'm at the gym, so I actually really need to focus on the thing that I need to do. And so, yeah, but I
Do you still go on walks with the chief?
I did that one time, but I don't
no
think
more
either
walks.
one of us really do that anymore.
Has the relationship deteriorated?
I don't think so.
Do you think he's doing a good job?
I think he's doing the best he can.
I was hopeful. And then there are times like the Davis Maturi shooting where he blamed him for getting shot. And I'm like, what were you thinking? Why would you say that?
Yeah, and then I think a thing that always concerns me is there's so much written about the culture of policing, like the thin blue line culture, right, out there, and it's like, if this is a person that I know and I believe really cares about people, and when things get really hard, like victim blames, then what does that say about the state of the institution?
Right.
Maybe the rest of us aren't crazy.
So government structure changed in 2021, as everyone knows. And one of the things the council still remains in control of is the budget. And you became budget chair. And I imagine that's why you would want to be budget chair, because that is the center of power in the new government structure, at least on the council side.
I love the budget. That's why I really fought to become the budget chair. But yes, you're correct about your analysis too.
So there were a lot of new procedures and new ways of doing business. I think you started earlier than ever before last year, right?
Correct.
What's going on with the budget? How do you think your first year as budget chair went? There was the pet projects criticism from the mayor's office, just against those earmarks. We got some earmarks. I've never heard earmark criticism lodged against the council. That's usually like a federal thing. So it was fun to have that conversation. How's it going?
It's fascinating to me, the amount of meetings that I've been to with our intergovernmental relations department. A couple meetings in that actually were with the mayor himself, where we were talking about chasing federal earmarks. Nobody had any concerns about the implication of pet projects then, when it was pet projects they wanted to. I would say you can call it a pet project, you can call it half baked, you can call it whatever you want to. I'm not going to apologize for fighting for money to come to my community. Period. I think I'm really proud of the work that we got to do in my first year as budget chair, and we're one quarter in to the second year, and the season is heating up again. But I think there's a lot of things that happened last year that were incredibly unprecedented, from the ways in which I really worked to democratize the process, to just these like weird last minute things that came our way throughout the year. So an example was the public safety aid reallocation, when we'd spent millions of dollars, or allocated millions of dollars of spending on urgent public safety needs we saw in our community, and halfway through the year, the administration came and wanted to like chop all of that money, and we had to come up with this creative solution to find a way to like save all of that money. To the first mayor in the city's history to veto a budget threatening the jobs of 4,000 employees who work at the city, and us being able to override that with 2 days in between passage and override. I think it is the job of the mayor is to propose a budget, and when we have a mayor that divests from our community, it's our job as representatives of all of the different geographies within our city to stand up for residents and try to remedy that. I think that's what you saw us doing.
The mayor proposes a budget, and the city council is not allowed to amend the budget. That's how it goes.
That's how it goes. It's kind of like, oh, if I do my charter obligation, then I'm the monster. But when you do yours, then I'm still the monster.
It felt like he wanted to propose a budget, and then there was this political game with the levy amount, the percentage. Then he wanted to come in and say, oh no, I'm redoing my levy amount afterwards. Like it was The Price is Right, and he wanted to get the last word in.
Yeah. No, it was super, super weird. I mean, I'd say like, I think there were a lot of us who asked many, like throughout that process, from when right before the budget came out and over the course of budget season, what we were asking the mayor for was, okay, can you help us understand what is it that you did to help reduce the impact of the levy? I know this is something that council members are really thinking about. It's something that's like really affecting our residents this year. Our levy amount is much higher than the 5-year projection ever showed it to be. And I get it, we live in unprecedented times. Things are happening within the market that are entirely out of our control. So help us understand, how did you trim fat? And their response was always, here's all the proposals we said no to. Here's the, tens of millions of dollars of new funding proposals that we said no to. And that's not an answer to the question. It's like, we're asking you, what inefficient programs did you cut? What things that weren't working, that are archaic, have existed for a long time, but don't actually like contribute. There's no measurable way in which they're necessary anymore. What did you cut? And the answer was always, we said no to millions of dollars of new spending. So then we went and we figured out a way to reduce the impact of the levy.
Let's talk about rent stabilization. It's kind of fallen off the radar in terms of the public debate a little, but like I heard from Elliot Payne, it's still a topic at City Hall. It's still like in process. So what do we want? What do you want to see in that policy? And how do we avoid having the St. Paul experience? Because they're currently in negotiation to ditch it.
Yeah. I mean, they have been since they first approved it. You remember. I think the number one thing that I want out of a rent stabilization policy is something that helps keep tenants in their homes and in the communities they love. Something that, holds, is a check to the price gouging efforts that can and do take place by those who own homes to those who call Minneapolis home. And I think that a policy that takes from the lessons that we have seen around the country, which is when you water down a policy and incentivize things like displacement and incentivize things like pricing or kicking a tenant out of their unit through efforts like vacancy decontrol, which is a component of our rent stabilization policy in which when a tenant moves out of their unit, the cap, the annual cap no longer applies. So you can reset that the cost of that unit to any amount you want to. The real world impact of such a policy is it incentivizes evictions. It incentivizes ways of pushing people out of their units, which disproportionately impacts negatively tenants of color, and in particular Black and immigrant tenants with families. I think that sort of thing is really important for us to weigh when we're creating our policy and making sure that we have vacancy control in our policy. I think there's many ways to think about how you get to a cap and figure out all of the other components of this policy. But I will say, to me, the most important thing, and I hope that's true for other policymakers as they approach this conversation, is, well, what is it that we can do to keep tenants in the homes and in the communities they love? And what is it that we can do to really address the problem that most tenants face today, which is an affordability problem? It's the reality is, if I own a piece of this city today, I pay less in housing costs than if I rent this city. And do I have any less a right to call myself a Minneapolis resident because I rent here? I don't believe so. I think for I'm just asking to have that same type of right that someone who holds a mortgage does.
How do we avoid the outcome where developers say, well, we're not building in Minneapolis anymore. This is too onerous. It's not profitable. We won't build. And you will have less tax base to collect for them, and taxes will be higher as a result. Should there be a new construction exemption? What needs to be built into the policy to avoid that outcome where developers say, we're not doing business in Minneapolis anymore?
Nothing stops a developer from doing that today. You've covered Minneapolis politics a lot longer than I have, and really closely. And you'll remember when former council member, and I believe at that time she was the council president, right? Lisa Bender proposed inclusionary zoning in our city. The same players that we're talking about today said it would bring development in our city to a halt. We went on to have some of the most profitable years of development in our city following the passage of an inclusionary zoning policy. So if we are going to prevent ourselves from building public policy because the people who stand to benefit the most from a rigged game in which their profit is what dictates all aspects of policymaking, then what's the point?
Well, setting aside the fact that developers are constantly lying. I
feel like that's a very succinct way of saying, I think, what I was trying to say.
So I think rent stabilization would be a more consequential policy for them. So it could be they lie all the time, but it could be this time it is true.
Well, you could say the same thing about, caps on how much you're allowed to charge when a tenant is coming in, right? So you could say the same thing about limitations on doing background checks, right? We were told suddenly every criminal in the tri-state area is going to come and try to rent from Minneapolis as a result. It's going to be the end of the world as we know it. Every single thing that we do to regulate a market that's really about some the people who are the consumers of it, their human right, they're a fundamental right, is going to be received that way, and ultimately like their job is to make money, and our job is to be accountable to the people that we serve.
So there is a point at which a policy would just make them not stop building in Minneapolis. Like we can debate like the minimum wage, for example. Like we should have a minimum
$7 ice
wage.
cream cones or whatever.
We should figure out what the right amount is. But same with rent control. Like you could set a minimum wage so high that doing business in Minneapolis doesn't make sense. It's not always what the business community says it is, but like that exists. So I'm wondering, like, what do we put into the policy that makes sure we still build housing in Minneapolis?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are ways to build this policy that also meld like components of 2040 or components of other like development policy, like inclusionary zoning, for example. So, you know, something that I could be really interested in is, you know, what are ways in which we can incentivize behaviors like building in permanent affordability, right? Like our inclusionary zoning policy builds in affordability for up to 20 years, right? Like that's the way it's functioning right now. So like what else can we do to incentivize that type of behavior, and what are ways that we can, like, you know, both use a carrot and a stick to incentivize behavior we want to see, or you know, what are ways in which we can incentivize development of units that are decarbonized, or units that building in additional density, things like that. So I mean, I think those are the places that I'm interested in having conversations on this policy. But if we're gonna and the unfortunate reality of City Hall, right, is like that we stay stuck in, well, have you looked at what happened at St. Paul? Like this housing is, Cecil Smith is really mad about rent control. Like, we can't even talk about it. Like, well, yeah, he's mad about everything we do. Like, I don't know what to tell you. But I think there are ways for us to be in a healthy space with this policy where we're talking about exactly what you're talking about. Like, what's the sweet spot? Like, what's the, like, $15 over a period of 3 years, you know, like a sweet spot of rent stabilization. I think it's possible to get there.
You know what you did? You stole my anecdote about inclusionary zoning. Did you steal that from me? Because I
looked it up one time when we were talking about rent stabilization or something, and I just like did a Google search on it, like, and I found this what is it? Not MinPost. Maybe it is a MinPost article about it.
It was like Steve Min and what's his name,
yeah,
the other
and
guy.
Like Steve Kramer is quoted in it, and so that's like, I think, yeah.
Okay, well, you found it yourself, but
yeah, look at you.
The developers.
I am going to
like,
say I stole it from you. Is that? I feel like that's good constituent pandering.
It is, yeah. Just the landlord lobby needs to stop going full bore against everything, because no people are going to stop taking you seriously. That's where we are now. Here's another of my frustrations about the mayor. He spent a lot of time last year arguing that the council was standing in his way on his administration's encampment response. Like, essentially, you're just preventing him from taking the very hard line that he wants to take. Like, he gave a few press conferences, like when there was a murder near an encampment, to like just act indignant and as though he was not in charge of the city's response. Yeah. And so, putting the lie to that, this year MPD has changed their policy with respect to encampments, and now it is MPD policy that they will prevent encampments from forming. So I wonder if you think that's a good policy?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, the thing that will prevent encampments from existing is if we address like homelessness, and we invest in the systemic interventions that move people that don't have a place to go every night into housing and supportive services, and actually address the problem. I mean, encampments are a symptom of the disease that is like chronic disinvestment in the poorest people who live in our society. That's ultimately what's going to solve this problem for the long haul, or we can continue like running around like chickens with our head cut off and talk about whose fault it is that encampments exist in the first place. But like, this is a solvable problem. We're talking about 500 people living outside. Like,
there's an element of the existence of encampments actually spurs action to solve the problem.
yeah,
And of course,
I think that's fair.
if you live near an encampment, it's the last thing you want to live near.
Yeah.
And so people get up in arms about it. So you could say stopping them from forming kind of takes the heat off the issue, and there's less pressure to go out there and solve the underlying problem.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say like, unsheltered homelessness existed before the Wall of Forgotten Natives. It will exist after, like Powderhorn or the Sheraton Hotel or Near North or Camp Nanikasi. Like, this is a problem that's going to exist until it's addressed. And I think the mayor's goal in an election year is to put that issue out of sight, out of mind for people, because it is one of his most significant failures, especially when he promised to fix or end homelessness in 5 years, right? Back in 2017, here we are almost 10 years later. I see his self-interest in hiding the problem of unsheltered homelessness. It just doesn't mean it stops existing, though.
You're working on, the council's working on safe outdoor spaces ordinance. What is the status of that? When could we see that happening?
It's being crafted by, in partnership with our attorneys right now. It is something that's going to have to go through Planning Commission approval, because there's like just a significant amount of, land use things that end up in the Planning Commission approval first arena. And then we were able to like expand the scope to both include safe outdoor spaces and safe parking, which, I think is something that is really effective in cold weather climates like Duluth as well as here. On track for later this year.
And Labor Standards Board.
Don't you think it's insane that we tried to create like an advisory board and
Yes.
workers and their employers would have like an equal voice, and that was like so radical.
And also the mayor objected to the composition of the advisory board. It's standard for advisory boards. You'll have like 2 or 3 mayoral appointments,
Right.
council gets the rest. That's just how it's done.
Right.
And so when he started complaining about that, a lot of people who hear that are like, look at reasonable Mayor Fry asking for something. Like, he'll get half, the council will get half. But that's not how it works.
Correct.
And it was for politics.
Yeah. That is true. I mean, I will say, I think every person, at least the 3 major challengers to Mayor Fry, all support a labor standards board. So I have that to look forward to.
Well, so does Mayor Fry. Mayor Fry supports the labor standards board.
Okay. Fair point.
He will not be outflanked.
You are correct about that, and I have nothing else to say.
Okay. Your thoughts on the mayor's race? Can I get you to make an endorsement? Make some news.
You can't get me to make an endorsement. You'll be shocked to learn, though, that I will be ranking some version of Omar Fateh, Emily Koski, and Dwayne Davis on my ballot, both in November and and if I'm lucky enough to be elected as a city delegate by my neighbors on April 8th. Caucuses are coming up next Tuesday. First one's in person since 2017. I hope that you will all go out to caucus anyway. I will be supporting some combination of all 3 of them.
Give me a recommendation. You got any new hobbies, things you're enjoying? Entertainment?
I got really into, I had COVID like 3 years ago and 3.5 years ago, something like that. And I started doing paint by numbers during that time. I have started 4 of them. I then moved on to doing these, what are they called? Diamond art things. It's like, it makes this very satisfying sound when you like place the diamond with like the stylus on. I don't know. Haven't finished a single one, but I think it makes for a great hobby.
You're starting things and not finishing them?
Yeah, it's...
Does the process get too hard? Is there like, I'm not sure I know what you're describing, but why would you start and not finish?
I think I'm describing anxiety. And I just get distracted. I'm too busy serving the people of Ward 10.
Is there something about the process that is more fun at a certain stage? And like, I'm just going to do that part.
Absolutely true. And then, like I feel like I get very nitpicky about details. So it's like, if it's like a paintbrush and then like one of the bristles gets like messed up, then I have to go buy a new paintbrush. There's no other option.
You were looking off camera as if you had a piece of art available. Can we see?
There's literally a box of this sitting like in underneath my coffee table. It's called... This is, as you can see, I bought this on, this is from a holiday, like from Christmas, right? Right. It was discounted. I bought it on clearance, and it's still in here. Still not done.
What is this product called?
It's called a diamond art kit. You can get it from like a Michaels, a Joann Fabric. Not that those exist in the city anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. What did we not talk about?
Are you caucusing, John?
I am. April 8th, I will be at the caucus.
Yeah, and where do you caucus this year?
I don't know. Do you know? I'm in 10-1.
Yeah, you're going to caucus at Whittier. It's interesting.
Oh, I have to leave the Wedge.
I know. You're going to have to cross Lindale. It's going to be a whole thing, but I promise it'll be a great experience. So all of Whittier and the northern half of the Wedge, so 10-1, caucus at Whittier Elementary School, and then all of South Uptown, 10-2, southern half of Whittier, south of 28th, right? And then all of East Bade-Makaska caucus at Queer Community.
Oh, okay.
Registration starts at 6:30 p.m.
So we have mega caucus sites.
Yeah, 2 this year. There's this whole thing around paying for caucuses and...
Right. Did you pay for it all? Were you one of those campaigns that paid for the whole thing?
I'm about to write a pretty massive check after I get off the phone with you. I should pay for a good chunk of my caucuses. Brought to you by my campaign.
Okay. Minneapolis Council Vice President Aisha Chughtai, thank you for spending an hour of your very precious campaign time with me.
Thank you for spending an hour of your very precious Wedge Live podcast time with me, host John Edwards.
Oh, thank you. This has been the Wedge Live podcast. I am your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.